where the logs would all get stuck together in the river, you use the PV cat dog to disconnect them and get them flowing again downriver. The cat dog was used in the lumber woods for all work in which the handling of logs was involved. Now, this article focuses on the PV and its use up north. But you should know that PVs were also used anywhere in the country where logging was done, especially done by hand. The cutting of trees and the moving of them, including here in the South. So it wouldn't be a tremendous surprise to go into the barn of a southern farm and find a PV in there. In building camps, bridges, dams, and other structures in which logs were used, the cat dog was an essential tool. When the tree was cut, the sled tender rolled the log on a sled which hauled it to the yard. And so you're using a transportation vehicle of sorts, the sled, with runners, to move the tree trunk that you've just cut down to the yard. The yard man rolled the trunk from the sled onto the yard and off the yard onto bobsleds, which hauled it to the landing, to the shore, that is, of the river or lake. Now you will see a bobsled in Glassey's book. He also makes mention of the PV. How do you find anything in Glassey's book? Well, there's an index. And I'm guessing that the best way to find a bobsled in here is to look under sled, bob. Sled, comma, bob. Let's try that. So, sleds, bob, 163, 166, and when you see a number in italics, that's where there's an illustration. 167, you will see a bobsled. And what is a bobsled? Well, you're familiar with automobiles that have something called independent suspension. That's what a bobsled is about. It doesn't have just one set of runners to slide along the ground. It has two sets. So that instead of a solid platform onto which the log rests, it rests between the two sets of runners. And when oxen are pulling this, or mules or horses, over rough terrain, if there's a bump, one of the sleds goes down, the other one stays up and then comes down, and you have this kind of fluid motion. Hence the sled bobs as it goes over rough terrain. Okay, so the log is on the bobsled and then is hauled there to the landing. The yard sled is a smaller size called a scoop and supports only one end of the log, the sled that hauls the tree out of the woods, that is. And so it drags the other end, the back end, along the ground. To travel on the road, both ends of the log must be off the ground, and that's where the bobsled comes in. At the landing man used a cant dog to roll the log from the bobsleds to the landing. To roll the log off the sled to the edge of the water. Let me show you another picture to give you a sense of the context. Maine, again, where I spent 2 wonderful summers teaching kids how to shoot as a riflery instructor, camp counselor. And here is a group of what outsiders would call lumberjacks. The insiders, the members of this subculture, this occupational subculture, refer to themselves as loggers or woodsmen. Cowboys didn't call themselves cowboys originally. That's an outsider's term. What did they call themselves? And still do sometimes.
Vaqueros?
Very close. Buckaroos.
Oh, okay.
Buckaroos, which is an anglicized
Version.
corruption of the Spanish vaquero,
Okay.
which means literally cowboy.
Cowman. Uh-huh.
Okay. So, in getting the logs down the rivers from the landing to the mills, the sawmills, that is, the cant dog was the tool used almost exclusively. Cant dogs rolled the logs from the landings into the stream, where the current carried them downstream to the mill. Logs carried downstream by the current were soon caught on the shore and on the curves of the river, places where the current set against the shore, the logs piled up to form wings. If the water should happen to fall, many of the logs were left high and dry on the rocks. Cant dog men were stationed at intervals to see that these wings did not build up enough to obstruct the channel. When jams formed, when too many of these logs got together and jammed the channel up, by using the dogs and picks of their cant dogs, their peavies, they loosened the tangled logs at the front of the jam until the pressure of the water, dammed up by the mass of logs, caused it to haul or give way. And so the logs were on their way again. Very dangerous work, because the loggers, the lumbermen, the lumberjacks had to stand on these logs in the water and pry them apart, and the logs would start to roll. And that would not be easy to stand up on. It wasn't unusual for them to fall off into the water, and then the logs would come together. These are heavy logs, and crush the logger to death. A number of the lumberjack ballads from up north describe these accidents. The Jam on Jerry's Rock deals with a foreman named Monroe who has to unjam a jam on a Sunday. And a lot of his workers were French-Canadian Catholics who didn't want to work on a Sunday. But he was able to get some of them together to break up the jam. And they went out with their peavies. The ballad doesn't talk about the tool, but that's what they would have used. And Monroe himself falls off and was crushed between the two locks and decapitated.
Whoa.
And they find his body downstream, his head in another place, and they have to notify his sweetheart. You can imagine her reaction to seeing her lover. in another lumberjack ballad, a much more pleasant one,